Hello, everyone. We should be making a start now. So, a warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining us today. Happy New Year, the first one in the new year. So here we go. As always, we're just going to start by making a very brief introduction. So for those of you who have joined us many times before, feel free to sit back for a moment on this one and have a little drink. But just so you know who you're listening to, that's me. I'm Karen. I'm the HR Knowledge Manager at HR Solutions, and I'm going to be the lead presenter for today. So you've got me for an hour, I'm afraid, and I am joined by my lovely colleague Ateem. She is here with me now, and she will just be sort of available to help out if there are any technical problems. Hopefully, of course, you won't have any, but if you did have one, just send her a message using your control panel. Equally, she will be monitoring and collating any questions that you might have as we go. So if you want to send any that you get over to her, she'll pass them along to me at the end of the webinar, and I will look to get back to you. So do send us them over if you have any, because we love getting them. You know, it's always interesting and tests our knowledge and help us find out new things as well that we might not have thought of. So do pop them over. And we are recording the session as always, and it will be available on our website for you to watch again if you would like to. And we also make the slide deck available to anybody who asks for them on request afterwards too. So yeah, please do drop us a message if they would be of interest to you. All right then, so this is what we're going to be covering today. It's quite a full-on session, lots of technical information, but hopefully, you know, it won't be too dry for you. As we go, we'll be aiming to give you some insights. So the first section, we're going to share with you some results that we've had from our Brexit in relation to HR, of course, from our clients and website subscribers, and just give you a bit of a perspective on, you know, how they feel, and you might think about how you fit in with that. We're also going to give some answers to some initial technical, you know, Brexit and HR, employment law related procedural things that have come up already. And we will also start giving you some, you know, surface level things that you can do to prepare, you know, in the event that you do experience some downturn, you know, in relation to everything that's going on at the moment. So things you can think about or even implement. And then in the next half of the webinar, we're going to look at giving you some key dates for your HR diaries for the year ahead. And we'll also give you a bit of an overview for each of those subjects as well, you know, that relate to those key dates. So yeah, hopefully you'll find it quite insightful and get you geared up for the year. So let's get cracking then. Our survey. So we sent out a survey a few months ago, and we did this to help us better understand the challenges and concerns that our clients and, as I say, our website subscribers have, just to help us with understanding a bit more what tools and advice to provide going forwards. And I thought it'd be worth sharing these with you today. So just to give you a quick idea of who was answering these questions, we've had over 100 companies respond, and we're still getting responses in, you know, up to date as well. We've had some in the last few days, actually. Now, the majority of these had 100 employees or fewer over multiple sites. Half of them operate internationally. And I'm just going to show you a few of the questions and answers that we got. And I just thought that perhaps along the way, as I said, you might like to consider where you would fit in by comparison. You know, it might make you feel better, or it might make you feel less alone, one way or the other. So of those that operated internationally, about half of those again actually operated in Europe. Many of them operated in the US and the Middle East as well. Now, with regards to recruitment and retention, which has been highlighted as a major concern in HR circles across the country, really, or across the UK, I should say, we asked our respondents about this, and we asked them if they currently employ individuals from Europe. So about 60% did employ somebody with an EU citizenship, or do employ, I should say. Nearly a third of them believe that their ability to recruit and retain employees from the EU has been affected already. And nearly 2/3 are worried about this moving forwards. And over 2/5 have considered alternatives to recruiting talent from Europe in light of Brexit already. When asked how concerned are you about the ability to recruit and retain talent from Europe, about half are concerned or very concerned about recruiting and retaining EU national employees. We've also asked the question, how concerned are you about the impact of potentially having to create a new company handbook and suite of employment policies and procedures? So nearly 2/5 aren't worried about this, which might be a good thing. I don't know if that's because they're comfortable with making changes or if they just don't think they will have to. A third of them aren't sure. And the rest are concerned or very concerned about this. And then in terms of just general business opportunities, we asked, do you believe that leaving the European Union will have a positive or negative impact on your business in relation to revenue and profitability? 20% felt that this was going to have a positive impact on them, actually, but a huge 80% felt that it was going to have a negative impact. And in terms of preparation, 31% felt that they've been able to prepare so far for a potential impact, and 69% have not felt that way. So I think that's quite interesting. You get some really varied responses. It seems to be affecting people differently just in terms of the level of worry alone, you know, and then some industry trends and things like that, stuff to do with where people are literally, who they have got in their organisations, all kinds of factors having various impacts on people. So I thought you might find that quite insightful. Now, I'm going to move on to the next part of this webinar. If you've joined me before, you'll know I've got into polls quite a bit at the moment. And in the theme of Brexit, I thought, why not do a would-be second referendum? So I'm just going to ask you all now to vote whether you think we should leave or remain. No, I'm not really going to do that. I think it's far too dangerous and I value my job too much. So what I am going to do though is ask you instead sort of similar questions to what we've asked these guys. How are you impacted by Brexit? So again, I'm not going to publish, you know, individual people's responses against their name or anything like that, but just to help us all get a bit of an overview, I think it helps to start, you know, open a discussion a bit. I'm just going to publish some options so you can think about all the different things here and pick one that suits, well, not one, sorry, but you can see pick all the options that suit you. So do you currently employ any EU nationals? Do you believe that you've already felt the impact of Brexit? Do you believe that you've not yet felt an impact? Have you made some preparations in the business as a result of Brexit? Or are you feeling not concerned about Brexit impacting on your business at all at the moment? So yeah, if you want to get involved in sharing how you're feeling a bit at the moment, it'd be great to see what everyone's thinking and feeling as we go. So I can see the answers and responses are changing all the time. I'll just give you another 10 seconds if you want to get your vote in. I think most people have so far. So it's just all the ones that you think apply to you. Okay, great. So I'm just going to close that now and put the results up so we can all have a look at the general consensus. So, wow, we've got a huge number of us who currently employ someone who's an EU national, about 89%. About a third of us have already felt the impact of Brexit. A third, that's quite substantial. Over half, though, have not felt it yet. Okay. But a quarter have made some preparations already. And about 11% aren't concerned about it impacting on you. Okay, that's great. It's really interesting. Let me move back to the webinar then now. So, yeah, there's a huge percentage of you then who have got EU nationals at the moment. So the next two sections certainly, you know, you might find some real value from, and you know, for those that don't, you know, in case you ever do in the future, the issue of, you know, the continued right to work, you know, is starting to cross people's minds quite a bit, and we do have some answers to this at the moment, despite the huge grey cloud of uncertainty that is going on out there. So let's have a look, and hopefully you'll get something out of this next section. So Brexit and the right to work then. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, we're due to leave the EU on the 29th of March. And upon the UK's exit, free movement between the UK and the rest of the EU will end. And that impacts both UK citizens who are living and working in Europe or in the EU, and those that are coming here to live and work. So what does that mean for employers then who want to ensure they've got the correct right to work documents in place? Well, from the 30th of March, there's going to be what's being referred to as a blanket period, okay, and this is expected to last for 2 years. Now, under this period, EU citizens who are presently lawfully residing and working in the UK may continue to do so without their rights being affected. Okay. However, if they wish to remain after this period, then they must have applied for and obtained a settlement status. Okay. Now, this settlement status application scheme is going to be fully open to the public from the 30th of March 2019. It's in a phased process of opening to certain groups of individuals at the moment for test runs and so on, but it'll be fully open from the 30th of March, okay? So this means that there will be no change to the right to work and what we're required to have in place for EU citizens until at least 2021. But certainly, you know, from the 30th of March this year, your EU citizen workers and employees will need to start applying for the settlement scheme if they wish to remain. Okay. So, from 2021, and we don't know exactly when, could be right from the beginning, could be from March, because there's a different sort of transitional period going on as well, that's distinct from this. But from around 2021, the requirements for right to work checks are therefore expected to change. And this is because it's going to be this settled status document which indicates whether or not a person who's an EU citizen has a right to work, which means an EU passport alone may no longer be evidence of a right to work in the UK, okay, for EU nationals. So your EU citizens will have to have this settled status residence document applied for. Thereafter, EU citizens who do not have this settled status residence document will need an employer to sponsor them to be able to work in the UK. Okay, and this is in accordance with the UK's future skills-based immigration system, which was published in December. Now, if any of you are or have been involved in Tier 2 visa sponsorships already, the scheme is expected to be similar, okay? So we currently have a Tier 2 visa system for skilled non-EEA nationals to come and work here. You know, if there's a skills shortage we can't recruit for. But you know, there are a number of concerns about the existing system. So the government are looking at ways in which they could try and minimise the bureaucratic red tape, which is good news. You know, for example, currently, if an employer wants to do this, they have to apply for a licence, which comes with fees. Some fees can be quite significant. It's also not uncommon to experience delays of up to several months before an individual can join them via this Tier 2 route. So understandably, that is causing some concern as a significant amount of our workforce come from the EU, and that's obviously going to pose some difficulties. But we'll have to see how it goes. There are certainly a number of issues and gaps within this still that need to be ironed out. But as with everything else, we're just waiting to see what happens, aren't we? What the government have said when you go and research, you know, advice on what's going on here, they are reminding employers that you have a duty not to discriminate against EU citizens in light of the decision to leave the EU, and that's both as a prospective and current employer. You know, so we still got to be careful that despite what some people might see as well, hurdles, you know, to employing somebody who's an EU citizen, we can't treat them differently because they are an EU citizen, which goes without saying, I'm sure, but it's important to bear that in mind going forwards. So there's quite a lot riding on this settlement status, and so I thought it would be appropriate for us to look at that in a little bit more detail as well. Though not directly related to employment law, I think we as HR professionals and business owners employing people are going to want to have a bit of awareness about it. So let's have a look. So applicants can apply for either a pre-settled or a settled status, okay? And the distinction between the two is whether or not the individual has got 5 years consecutive residence in the UK. If not, they can apply for pre-settled, and if they do, they can apply for settled. So having a settled status is not the same as citizenship, okay? So for example, holders of this status don't have to have a UK passport. But those who do have a settled status and 6 years residence can apply for citizenship. A settled status would generally be lost if someone was absent from the UK for about 2 years or more, unless they had really strong ties here, namely family ties. But yeah. And as I mentioned then, so EU citizens and family members who want to stay in the UK beyond the 31st of December 2020 will need to apply to this EU settlement scheme, okay, which is fully open from the 30th of March. Now, there is some eligibility criteria, but it's not a great deal, to be honest. Pretty much people who are lawfully here already should be able to stay. There's the odd thing like you can't be a criminal, you know, but otherwise people shouldn't really face too many problems with regards to eligibility. The scheme will allow individuals to continue to live, work, study here, continue to be eligible for public services, you know, healthcare, schools, public funding and pensions and so on. Now, the fee to apply is £65 for adults and £32.50 for children under 16. But it would be free if you've already got a valid permanent residence document or indefinite leave to remain. And a little bit further down the line, if you had a pre-settled status already and you'd got to that 5 years and wanted to up it to the settled status, that would also be free for you to do. So, questions employers are likely to ask then. There is no legal obligation for you to communicate this scheme to your staff, but you may well wish to signpost them to the information that the government is providing. I think about a year or so ago, I think it was probably this time sort of last year actually, we talked a bit about Brexit coming up, and there was a significant survey done of EU nationals across the UK, and many talked about what they would like from their employers to feel more confident about their position and their jobs here, and a lot of them talked about having conversations with their employers, and their employers sort of telling them that they wanted them to stay, you know. So I certainly think a conversation about this sort of thing would be well received by many if you did want to have that discussion. If you do, just please be careful not to provide immigration advice unless you're qualified to do so. You know, it's not your job, and you really wouldn't want to get that wrong. In terms of those costs that I mentioned before, employers are not expected to pay or support the cost of EU settlement scheme application. Okay, you're not expected to do that. If you wanted to, you can do so at your discretion. Okay. Now, if you wanted to do that, and you wanted to pay or reimburse your employee's application, then that payment would be taxable as employment income, because it's a payment of direct monetary value to the employee, but you can choose to meet the cost of the tax charge if you wanted to as well. Okay, so there's an option there. So yeah, that's an overview into settlement status. Hopefully it gives you enough to sort of be getting on with. There's a lot that can be read. There's also a government, well, the government have created a toolkit which has got some quite easy to digest infographics, and it's an employer focused toolkit that you can, you know, download and share with your staff. So do have a look for that, and you might find it very helpful. And next then, I thought it's worth us having a look at some things you can do just on a sort of cursory surface level, things you might want to go and think about a bit more in order to prep for a downturn. Hopefully, you know, you might be able to make the most of opportunities that could come from Brexit, but invariably and perhaps inevitably, there is a lot of anxiety inducing figures that have been projected. the government have already published estimates from research they've commissioned that changes to free movement, as we've discussed, is going to see the UK workforce reduce by between 200 and 400,000 EEA nationals over the first 5 years, which is a really significant proportion of the UK workforce. And they've equally forecast that this will negatively impact on gross domestic product by 2025. But the population will be smaller, so the effect per head is likely to not be as big as it would otherwise have been if all these people were still here, which might be a small silver lining, depends how you look at it. A major institution has also predicted about 83,000 redundancies in London as a direct result of Brexit, pretty much, you know, and so on. You've seen earlier our respondents that we asked, you know, are concerned that Brexit will have a negative impact on their revenue growth and profitability. So, you know, in line of this, although I'm taking a slightly negative approach, it's perhaps, you know, sensible to think about things we can prep in case we feel negative effects. Certainly, I think about 30% of you have put some things in place to prepare for Brexit, whether positive or negative. So these things might help. You know, HR, it's called human resources for a reason. People are a resource. If you don't already, think about setting some clear targets, you know, and time-orientated goals to really maximise efficiencies of people. You could think about setting up some working parties, you know, to get a holistic view and insights into the operation of all different departments in your company. If you include team members from all areas, it would help, you know, with bringing some valuable feedback, you know, and ideas that you might not necessarily otherwise come across, you know, both from board level and perhaps people out in the field and on the ground and stuff. You might consider whether it's appropriate to encourage or even the opposite, discourage annual leave to be taken, you know, if there's not so much demand going on at the moment. You can also look to restrict any option to take optional paid overtime. You can put a limit on that. You may even want to consider putting a hold on recruitment, you know, in non-essential areas. And in case you should really feel some issues, you know, with cash flow, think now about putting some real savings aside to be able to continue to run payroll, you know, if you should have cash flow problems, so you can continue to meet your obligation to pay staff, even if you can't provide work. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you can't provide work, you do still have to pay staff, you know, unless you've got the right to lay them off or put them on short-time working. So it might be worth checking your contracts now, just to familiarise yourself with whether or not this is a potential option. If you don't have those contractual rights, then you might want to consider building them into any new contracts that you offer for any new staff that you take on, just so that if the worst should happen, you've at least got some flexibility there. It's something you never hope to use, and many don't have to, but it's worth it being there just in case. Bit more of a positive thing, but you might want to look for areas of opportunity, okay, and consider undertaking any, you know, sort of inexpensive projects that might have been in the pipeline, but perhaps have otherwise not been afforded time because you've, you know, got strained because of demand. You know, if you were to experience some downturn, this might be an opportunity for you to develop staff, you know, in terms of learning or qualifications or any other sort of business furthering or value added tasks that you can look to undertake. And there's always, you know, this, you know, looking at building enthusiasm through some inexpensive but morale boosting activities. You know, it's not to be overlooked. It can really help to encourage people's motivation to, you know, keep doing the best for the business and remain positive, which, you know, has huge benefits just on the general output and day-to-day feel amongst the organisation, which is always going to be beneficial. So here we go. So we're about halfway through the webinar today, and that's really all I've got time for to cover with regards to Brexit in this session. But there is loads more to be talked about. And indeed, I am holding a seminar in a fortnight where you have the chance to chat to me and bring along questions and have lunch. But we'll talk about that again a bit later on. But for now, I hope that sort of snippet has given you some helpful pointers in light of the change coming up. So part 2 then, time for a good glug of tea if you've got one handy, and we'll move on then to some changes that are coming up in 2019. So things that you can put in your diary. And first up, we have got the executive pay ratio reporting. So this might not be affecting a great number of people. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to affect anyone that's here today, perhaps. But if it is, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how you're getting on with it. But you might be aware, you might have seen it in the news and stuff, it was Fat Cat Friday very recently. So if you're not familiar with that, this is where the average FTSE 100 CEO, 6 of which are women at the moment, will earn the average full-time employee salary. Okay, so they will earn that by the 3rd working day in January. The average UK employee salary by the 3rd working day in January. So I think it was the 4th of Jan this year. They will earn about 133 times more than the average worker. And the average full-time salary, based on figures at the moment, is £29,574 a year. So this means that those CEOs are earning about £1,000 an hour. Which is nice for them. Now, the CIPD and the High Pay Centre are calling for a major overhaul of how executive pay is set out in the UK. The requirement to report on the executive pay ratio is of course not going to be that overhaul, but it does, I suppose, hold up a mirror, which in theory should expose the extent of the gap in individual companies that are obligated to report it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out. So I want to give you some information on this. Now, this is actually something then which required businesses are already having to start doing. So with effect from the very beginning of the year, UK corporate governance reforms are requiring about 900 listed companies to annually publish and justify the pay ratio between CEOs and their average UK worker. Okay, so this requirement is in effect from the 1st of January. It's applicable to quoted companies with more than 250 UK employees, and they have to publish as part of their directors' remuneration report the ratio of their CEO's total remuneration, okay, to the median or the 50th, the 25th and the 75th percentile full-time equivalent remuneration of their UK employees. Okay, so this is companies who have 250 UK employees or more, and a ratio in pay difference of 120 to 1 or higher. Now, they must also publish some supporting information, and this has got to include the reasons for any changes to the ratios from year to year, And in the case of the median ratio, whether and if so how the company believes this ratio is consistent with the company's wider policies on employee pay, reward and progression. So they've got to justify essentially what their figures are. Just to give you an insight about what the calculation is going to include, so we know what's being analysed, it perhaps goes without saying that employee wages and salary must be included in the pay ratio calculation as a minimum. But where there are other pay and benefits, which I'm going to list, have been awarded, then these would need to be included in the calculation. Okay, so it's taxable benefits, annual bonus, share-based or other incentive plans and remuneration, pension benefits. Now, whatever components are used to calculate the employee's wage, the same components must be used to calculate the CEO's remuneration. Now, although this is underway already, it's really the data, the information that needs to start being collated from the 1st of Jan this year. And we need an annual report, so we don't expect to see the first reports published 2020. So we've got the first dates for the diary then. Executive pay ratio reporting. The collection of the data is underway now from the 1st of January. And we will expect to see the first reports probably at the same time next year. Okay, so January 2020, I'm sure it'll be all over the news, and we'll probably be discussing it again then. So another ratio reporting then. This year we're going to see the second round of gender pay ratio reports coming out. I thought this would be a good opportunity to have our second and final interactive poll for the afternoon. So I'm going to ask you a question. The question is whether or not this statement is true or false. So with regard to gender pay ratio reporting, true or false? Gender pay reporting promotes equal pay for equal work. Is that true or false? So let me just pull up the poll and launch it. So in this context, gender pay promotes equal pay for equal work. Is that true or false? What does the ratio represent? Okay, we've got about 2/3 of you voted so far. I'll just give you another 15 seconds on that. Okay. Just give you a few more seconds. I think that's nearly everyone now. Right, I'm going to close it. And let's share the results. So we've got 82% of you say true and 18% saying false. Okay, right, let's hide those and skip forward to see the answer. So the answer is actually false. Okay, so gender pay ratio reporting actually promotes or indicates inequality in opportunity. Okay, now don't feel too bad. I think most of you answered true. Those who answered false, well done. Don't worry if you got it wrong. I've watched reports about it on the news on the BBC and they get it wrong. So don't worry too much. I think it's the reason why there's common problems with reporting and discussions about what it shows and stuff like that. So it's well worth us clarifying it. Gender pay ratio reporting indicates unequal opportunity. Okay. it's distinct from equal pay. So I misled you by actually putting up what equal pay promotes. Okay, equal pay is about comparing the earnings of men and women doing the same work, equal pay for equal work. Whereas gender pay actually looks at the overall earnings of an organisation's male and female employees. Okay, now there's a very subtle difference there initially, but it actually has quite a profoundly different outcome. Essentially, what a gender pay gap is going to show is, I mean, let me give you an example. It might be that an organisation has a great deal many female employees at, say, a lower rung of the chain of command, you know, for want of better phrase, but there might be a lot of male employees at the top. Okay, there might perhaps be a single female who's also at the top, and she may be getting paid the same as a male comparator, you know, in the same job. But if there are many males, you know, at the top end of the organisation, which generally attracts the higher paid jobs, and all the sort of women employed in the organisation are at the lower end of that scale, then your gender pay ratio reporting would expose that uneven spread. Okay. And then organisations, you know, essentially would be asking themselves whether or not there are issues with access to promotion or recruiting women at higher level positions in the organisation. So this is why somebody might actually not have an equal pay issue, but they may still be concerned about their gender pay. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Equal pay is about equal pay for equal work. Gender pay is about unequal opportunity within an organisation. So who's affected? So employers with 250 employees or more in the public and private sector, they have to publish their gender pay ratios, and the deadlines this year are going to be the 30th March and the 4th of April respectively, and they've got to be published on the gov.uk website, which makes them public information. So our next lot of dates for the diary then, 30th of March for the public sector deadline and 4th of April for the private sector deadline. Yeah, so I hope that was interesting and clarified that for you. Next up, we're looking at itemised pay statements. This is quite a significant change that's coming up. So from the 6th of April this year, the Employment Rights Act, Itemised Pay Statement Amendment Order 2018, to be precise, will require employers to include the number of hours that employees are being paid for on their pay slips where pay varies by reference to time worked. Okay, so I'm actually talking about the second bullet point there at the moment. So this can be done either as an aggregate figure or it can be done as separate figures for different types of work or different rates of pay. Okay, and that's all about improving clarity and promoting employees' awareness of their rights being met, essentially. And another key difference that this order is bringing about is the right for workers to receive a pay slip. Okay, now this might seem surprising. I think many employers might already issue workers pay slips without, you know, thinking anything of it. But actually, if you were to read the Employment Rights Act as it currently stands, only employees are entitled to receive a pay slip. Okay, but this will no longer be the case from the 6th of April. It will be employees and workers. So yeah, distinctions there obviously in the different types of employment status, but not going to be an issue anymore in respect of this anyway from the 6th of April. So key dates to have awareness of then, 6th of April 2019, your workers should be getting pay slips, and any pay that varies based on the time worked will need to be itemised. So if you employ people directly to do your own payroll, check they're aware. If you have outsourced payroll providers, well worth checking that they're aware. You would expect them to be, but if they're not, beg some serious questions. At least you are keeping yourself on the straight and narrow. Which moves on to the next one, another pay-related topic, and the annual interest, area of interest. What's the national minimum wage going to be? So you might have seen it already, but if not, we're seeing the £8 barrier broken. So for those aged 25 and above, they will have to be paid £8.21 per hour from the 1st of April 2019 as a minimum. Okay, and then other figures based on age going down from there. And take note of the distinction for apprentices as well, about what year of their apprenticeship they're in. So I've put national living wage in brackets there for the top category. Just remember that although it's being called the national living wage, you know, just to confuse us, it is still actually a national minimum wage requirement, and it's distinct from the living wage, which is more a concept to strive for based on the cost of living. So the national living wage is a minimum wage, okay? And this applies to most workers, these rates. And then we have other sort of family friendly and other statutory rates, really. So we can see the lower earnings limit. It's going up to £118 a week. SSP is going up to £94.25. And then the statutory rate for family related leave is increasing to £148.68. And these ones are increasing with effect from the 6th of April. Okay. So the dates then, national minimum wage increases from the 1st of April 2019. And remember to diarise birthdays for those who are on the cusp of an age bracket and going to move over, so that you are paying them the increased rate with effect from their birthday. And then the other statutory rates are in effect from the 6th of April. And then I just want to talk about preparation for parental bereavement rights briefly. So presently, mourning the recent loss of a child does not mean that an employer is automatically obligated to permit that parent to have authorised absence from work. Okay, and that can seem surprising to some, but it is in line with the fact that there's no statutory right to compassionate leave at the moment. Okay. Now there is the right to time off for dependents in the event of emergency. That time is intended to deal with arrangements for an emergency rather than to take time to deal with your feelings and things like that. Although I'm sure many employers would be compassionate in this sort of situation. But going forwards, we will have a new law that would have to be complied with as a minimum, at least. Now, this was published toward the end of 2018, about mid-September. We got the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act given royal assent. So that's published. There are still regulations to follow, and these will confirm the finer points and legalities and things like that. It will also confirm the date that the Act is going to come into force. Okay, it could be this year, could be the year after. But the Act itself does confirm a great deal of information, okay, including minimum rights, entitlements, qualification criteria, who would qualify as a parent, and so on. So employers are now able to prepare and put provisions in place, okay, I'm talking policies, procedures, thinking about what you currently do now, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a lot of information, so actually it's going to form the basis of my next webinar, which you would be very welcome to attend and can sign up for. I believe our page is being updated at the moment, so a sign up will be available in the next day or so. But we'll be focusing on what the provisions, in the new Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Act shall be, as well as how to introduce new terms and provisions safely, particularly if you have any existing arrangements. But it is certainly something that HR professionals, HR consultancies ought to be preparing for now. I'm sure you would all agree that it's far better to have, knowledge about what you're going to do and preparations in place in the event that a tragedy such as this should come up, rather than working it out after the fact, just to make things as smooth as possible for individuals having to go through it. Okay. So that leads me on then to the last section of our webinar today. I'll have a quick look into the future at what else is in the pipeline. Things that are unlikely to come up this year, but certainly could do if they're suddenly brought forward to surprise us. But otherwise, we'll expect them next year, but probably get the detail about it this year or so on. So let's have a look. On the horizon then, we've got a potential duty to have to advertise if a job can be done flexibly when we put a job advert out. So this is in line with the Employment Opportunities Bill, which is seeking to introduce more freedom, flexibility and opportunity for those seeking employment, which is good if you're an employee. We might finally be getting a definition of a worker and their rights. So this is great news. I'm sure you won't be unaware of stories in the press about organisations like Uber and Deliveroo and Pimlico Plumbers and all those companies who have gotten into all sorts of problems with this. So yeah, we might have a definition of a worker finally. If you're familiar with using agency workers, you might have heard of the Swedish derogation model. This is due to be abolished in April 2020. Written statements, or sometimes we just refer to them as contracts, the content of these is expected, is due to change. So the minimum content and how this should be presented will change in 2020. We currently work to a 12-week reference period when calculating how much pay somebody should be entitled to. So the average week's pay that should be given during a holiday. The reference period of 12 weeks is going to be up to 52 weeks in the future. Workers who've had pay slips this year, next year, they're going to get written statements too. So, yeah, important time for them. Yeah, currently the entitlement to a written statement is only something afforded to employees, but workers will be entitled to these too. It's also going to be the case that both workers and employees are going to be entitled to receive this from day one of employment, whereas at the moment we have up to 2 months to provide them with a written statement. And they are entitled to a written statement within a month, employees. Informing and consulting employees. So the percentage, currently there's a percentage that has to be met, and this is required in order for a request from employees to negotiate an agreement with their employers about major changes to terms and things like that coming up to be valid. And this is going to be lowered in the future. National insurance contributions are going to be payable on payments over £30,000 in 2020. We're going to see the IR35 rules applied to the private sector soon. Of course, the transitional period for Brexit will be due to end on the 31st of December 2020. We also expect to see the ethnicity pay gap, which is currently a bill. We expect to see that passed soon. Could be this year, could be next year, which will require large employers to publish information related to differences in remuneration between different ethnic groups. Tips. So when you leave your tips in the restaurant and so on, we expect to see legislation at the earliest opportunity, so could easily be this year, set out to ensure that workers who provide the service get the tips that are left for them and are not taken by the employer. And we also have the government consulting at the moment on whether or not employers should be required to publish their parental leave and pay policies if they're an organisation that employs 250 or more staff. And the reason for this is all part of their aim to improve flexibility and to improve the ability of people to balance their working and family life. So in theory, job applicants can make informed decisions about whether or not they can combine the role they're looking at applying for with caring for their family. That's pretty much it. There's a lot there, but I hope you found it insightful. Just to let you know, we've got a number of seminars coming up. We've got Brexit for Employers coming up this month. We've got our popular employment law seminars scheduled. In fact, we've actually got the 25th of April. Sold out at the moment, so we've put an additional date on in London. So if you would like to get a place on those, please do come along. I expect to be at all of them, you know, and they really are great sessions because we can sit and talk face to face about things, and you can put your questions to us and things like that, and they're always a lot of fun. We do have the Brexit one on the 24th of January. I said before, you know, we've covered a few things, but I mean, we could have looked at each of those in more depth. We're going to be looking at things like the EU law that's currently implemented in the UK, current Brexit discussions on how that's expected to change, impact people have felt so far and how HR can deal with all of those sorts of things, how we can implement change safely, because in respect of change, we've got to make sure we're not breaching terms and conditions and so on. We're also going to look at how you can manage concerns of your EU employees and even harness opportunity, build on your employer brand and all sorts of things like that. So if you are interested, please do get onto our website and come and join me. If you're not signed up, we have a new knowledge base coming soon where we keep all kinds of information, newsletters, template documents and policies and things like that that you can use, guides on different topics, and that's due to be launched really soon. So we're really excited about that. And that's it. We're at the end of today's session. If you've sent a question over, then thank you very much for that. I'll get back to you very shortly and get my teeth in. If you do have any questions that you've not sent over yet, pop them over. You normally get a follow-up email, I think, automatically after this session, so that's always a chance to do it as well. I'd love to hear from you. Always helps us to think about, you know, all sorts of new things and different perspectives and stuff like that, so pop them over. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. Pleasure as always, and I do hope you'll join us next month, and we will speak to you again soon. Take care. Thank you, and have a lovely afternoon. Bye.